Alright, so Yandere Dev. I don't know if you guys have heard of him, but basically he makes this game called Yandere Simulator, and it's been a while, and there's all this drama about it, and speedruns and all this stuff, and like rape allegations and some other stuff. But anyway, really bad things, and one of the worst of them is code. He's apparently very bad at code, and someone recently linked me to all of the code of Yandere Simulator, or rather a large majority of it, a decent portion. And we're going to be going over that because I feel like there's some stuff in there that people have been glossing over. And I don't blame them. A lot of people aren't really coders. They don't really, talk about this stuff very frequently, so I get it. But I think most people have been focusing on the other things, and I feel like it's warranted to take a look at this real quick. So first of all, this is the Debunk Page that he made. It's an official response to a lot of the rumors, I guess, about him. And don't get me wrong, I believe a lot of these are false. Genuinely. I don't think all of these are true in any regard. However, I should point out, I think that this is an awful way to do this response, because you're explicitly talking about all of these different terrible claims, like ignored a suicidal girl, doesn't credit as volunteers, this, all of them are terrible for the most part. And like, you look at this, and I understand personally that I need to back up these claims before I believe in them, or rather I need to read the backup and everything and hear both sides, but like, you gotta think about the fact that if even 1/50th of these are true, that's awful, like, and there's a pretty decent chance that there's some truth in these, this one might be like a 10th true, and this one might be a 10th true, and so on and so forth, and like, that's kind of, eek, it's not great. I feel like this is just a really poor, kind of way to present this response, right? But we're not going to talk about that. We're just going to talk about the code, because that's the easiest thing to talk about for me. And we'll start up here with this. This entire section can be summed up here. Basically, he replies to Yandere Dev is a bad programmer with, in short, no, I'm not. I think that this is okay to say. It's not terrible to back up your skill as a developer, for sure. However, a lot of this is stupid. A lot of this is, like here, for instance, we're going to talk about this because he literally claims that this is not true. And you can pause the video and read this, but I'll explain it later. Basically, this whole paragraph is talking about how he's not actually a bad coder because a lot of people are just kind of picking on him for no particular reason, right? So that's something that I want to talk about, but more particularly, we're going to come back to this section right here. So we're going to go over to the code. And for those of you that don't know, I'm going to give you a little bit of context as to Unity code. I'm not personally a Unity programmer. I'm not a game developer that uses Unity, but I know a little bit about it. I know a little bit about C# too. Basically, every single script, or most of the scripts in Unity, have an update function. So we can go find this update function. It's going to take a little while, but there we go. So this function is run every frame, right? That's great. Now, this isn't great, it doesn't look great, but it's not the worst thing I've ever seen, right? These else ifs come up everywhere, and I'm going to talk about that. But first, I want to talk about update. So he explicitly says here, his update function is 8,000 lines long. That means 8,000 lines of code are running on every frame, and he debunks this, quote-unquote, by saying only a fraction of this is actually running at a given time. Now, he's not wrong about that, okay? He's not wrong, but the other guy also isn't wrong. All right, he legitimately has 8,000 lines of code running here. So this just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes. And I scrolled for a long time before I even read that part of the thing, and I tried to find something relating to it. I tried to find the end that it's talking about, and it takes a long time. It legitimately is 8,000 lines. That's not an exaggeration. And don't get me wrong, all right? You can absolutely have an update function that calls a large portion of code, for sure. Absolutely, all right? I get that. However, what I don't get is the fact that he's defending all of the 8,000 lines themselves, right? So it's totally fine to have a lot of code in an update function because, like he says, a lot of it isn't running, usually. But that's not the case here. Sure, a lot of it isn't running. It's not 8,000 lines every fucking frame, because if it was, the game wouldn't even run. What I'm saying is not that it's running all 8,000 lines. What I'm saying is that it's probably running 250 to 500 lines every single frame, which is awful. That is still terrible, because none of this stuff is, like, this is expensive. A lot of this is really expensive, and a lot of them call other functions. Like, it's not like this is just doing nothing. It's not like, these 3 lines here are probably pretty expensive on their own. These are other functions. These are other functions. These are conditionals. Like, I get that it's not running 8,000 lines every frame because the game wouldn't run. And if it runs, it obviously isn't doing that. What it's doing is running a significant portion of that, right? Even less than like 10% of 8,000 lines is a lot. That's 800 lines. The game probably still wouldn't run if it ran that much, right? Because all of this stuff in here is like extraordinarily expensive. And the reason for that is because he doesn't seem to understand conditionals. And don't get me wrong, I would not ordinarily attack a coder for coding in a certain way, okay? I totally get that there are certain circumstances that prevent you from coding to your perfect maximum. I personally have a lot of sloppy code lying around in my game because I don't have time to sit there and perfect something to the ideal standard. However, what we're talking about here are not like complex concepts. They are not like really in-depth, hard to understand things that like for some reason deserve, you know, a great deal of sympathy. We're talking about if and else if conditionals. That's what you learn on day 2 of computer science, and on day 3 you learn how to avoid using too many of them, right? And what we're seeing here is that he's literally not ever taking that class, or has never taken that class, I should say. So like right here, all of these else ifs can be replaced with a switch. And personally, I was a little bit pissed when I saw some of the comments on original videos talking about his, you know, code and everything, because I do not believe that for else ifs is necessarily a terrible piece of code. I get that it's more efficient to use a switch statement, but it's very mildly more so, right? And I get that. And I thought that was what was happening here, but it's not. It is absolutely not. There are hundreds of cases of else ifs being used in chains like this, and it's absurd. If we look up else if real quick, we'll come up with, I think, 2,000, which is insane. That is absurdly high. It's 597 for else if, and for a regular if, it's 2,000, right? I think. And that is crazy. I genuinely believe 90% of this code here is completely based on else ifs and ifs. And the thing I was getting pissed at is people that don't code looking at this and saying this looks terrible. It is pretty bad, but it's not like awful. What I would call awful are chaining together if statements like this. So this is one example, but I'm going to talk about this example up here. I just want to show that there's multiple cases of this happening. Basically, to give you a bit of a debrief if you don't know about else ifs and ifs, these two pieces of code here, right? This will run, it'll check this conditional. If it's true, this will run. Same thing here. So if this is true, it'll run this code. It checks both conditionals, and if they're true, it runs whatever's inside. It's completely okay to have multiple if statements in a row if you're trying to check different unrelated things. Now, elsewhere in this code, there are examples of else, here we go. So ifs and else ifs. So here, if this runs, and this is true, if this student ID is 86, this will not run, right? So potentially you're only running 1/4 of the code here, which is great. That's what they're there for, right? And again, it's bad to have 100 else ifs, but it's still better than having 100 ifs, right? Now down here is a really great example of 100 ifs. See, I am assuming, I haven't coded the game, I haven't looked at it in depth, but I'm assuming that because this is not an array, this can only ever be one number. Now, this is checking every single one of these. So let's say, right, that the student ID is 8, right? You would assume, okay, it's 8, so we'll do whatever it says up here, and then we'll do this down here. If you're not a coder or whatever, that's pretty fair. That's not the case, though. Because these aren't else ifs, this runs, it finds that it's 8, it runs this code, and then it runs this. It checks this, it checks this, it checks this, it checks this. None of these are true, and none of this code is run, but all of it is checked, which is really expensive, and it keeps going. It keeps going. Is it 76, 77, 78, 79, 80? It goes until the end, and then it returns this. That's absurd. And I totally understand. I totally fucking get that 8,000 lines are not running every time the frame loads, right? That would be absurd. And again, it wouldn't run. So obviously that isn't the case. But what I do get is that shit like this is running. And this is running every frame in some cases. And I get that this won't run again probably. But even if it does, like, if this ever runs more than once, like if this runs 2 frames in a row, you are consuming hours of people's lives in processing time. Like, this is an absurd amount of time. We're talking about literally something that would tank FPS by like 10 when this happens. And that's insane. Why this is even here is absurd to me. And you know what? We can go back here. And I get that this has some merit to it. I get that some pieces of his code are older, and I totally understand that. I have the same issue. There's older pieces of code that I'm embarrassed of because they're not that great. But you go back over and you fix those. And to me, it seems a lot like with all of the other claims coming forward about his streams and gaming and not coding, that he just doesn't want to. He's not a coder, in my opinion. He's a game designer, and that's sort of the issue here, but he's also trying to make the claim that he's a good coder, which is just frankly not true. A good coder goes back over their code and refactors everything to make it more efficient. And here we're looking at literally direct proof that that's not the case. Also, like, some of this stuff here, like, I'll read this out. Many of these people draw false conclusions. When the students are disabled, the frame rate improves. Therefore, the low frame rate is caused by his crappy code. In reality, the frame rate improves because the game has to do less physics / pathfinding / animation / rendering when a student is disabled. This, I think, is just really fucking stupid. Like, pardon my French, but I really don't know. I'm sure that most people who watch this video will read that and go, what? And like kind of have a question mark, because what they're saying here is literally what he's saying. He's like, they're saying that when the students are gone, the frame rate improves, thus it's his fault that the frame rate is bad. And then he replies by saying, actually, the frame rate improves because the game stresses less when there are less students. Which, yeah, like, he's the person that coded it, you know? Like, he's the reason that it's laggy like that. Like, the students ordinarily do not have to be super laggy. It's not like Unity just doing that when the students are there. It's not like, you know, someone is just sniping his code in the head or something like that, you know? It's his fault. It's his fault that this stuff is causing that much lag. The stuff he says doesn't have to happen when a student is disabled, you know? And it leaves me kind of bewildered. And another piece of this that really frustrates me, that has always frustrated me, is when people blame the fucking engine. And I get that Unity and Unreal and every other engine has flaws and they aren't perfect, but like this, like literally if you look at this code right here and then blame that on Unity, that makes me so pissed, because if I was developing that engine, I would legitimately try to fix the problem, and then at the end of that tunnel, I would find this code and I would just give up. I would probably quit my job, because like literally this guy is broadcasting to the world and basically saying that the game is the problem. It's not him doing that. It's not his fault that the physics are causing so many problems or the rendering are causing so many problems. It's just how the game is, because he's using Unity. And I know he doesn't directly say that here, but it's very similar to that claim. And it's very frustrating when people do that, because if I was making a game engine, I would take that seriously, you know? It's really important that your game engine runs smoothly and efficiently and quickly, and this guy's out here shit-talking it because he decided to write his code like this. That is so stupid in my opinion, and it's honestly cowardly in my opinion as well. So, I don't know. I don't know about any of these claims. I mean, I know about some of them, but I don't know anything in depth. I have no proof, but I just got this piece of code, and I want to say, like, what I was saying earlier is, like, if 150 of these are true, that looks terrible on him. And we just proved that this entire thing is false. Like, this entire claim is true, basically. And that makes me really go, like, okay, well, it's not 1/50th of these that are true. It's, like, a legitimate portion. And I look at these other ones down here, like, wants to kill his parents and etc. And I'm like, well, if this one is such an outright lie and so stupid and cowardly, I can't help but look at these other claims, like this one, which I'm sure has some merit, and go, okay, well, maybe this is actually true. And I look at this guy and I have an even worse opinion of him, which is, again, playing into the fact that I think that this whole thing was terrible. I think he just has the worst social, like, interaction ability in the world. And that's coming from a guy who's self-proclaimed, like, a little autistic and a couple other things. So, I don't know. I think it's just really frustrating, especially as a coder and someone who really respects this craft, to see someone doing this kind of shit and insulting engines and blaming it on other people and not himself, and rejecting help from people that are skilled, and so on and so forth. It's embarrassing for the profession, to be honest. But whatever the case, I thought it was funny to look it over anyway, so I hope you guys thought so too. I hope you guys took my criticism seriously. Whatever the case, have a great day. I'm going to be posting a showcase later this week, so enjoy.